Some of the most common questions that I get asked on social media are all about how to get a career working with wildlife or outside with nature. So this is a video where I'm going to share some tips and advice, answer some questions that you've sent in, and hopefully get you on the way to getting your first job in nature and wildlife conservation. I've put all the timestamps in the video description below, so feel free to jump ahead to the bits that you think you'll find most interesting. And if you do find this video helpful or useful in any way, please give it a like, let me know in the comments, and hit subscribe for more nature and wildlife stuff. Alright then, so to begin, a little bit about me and my background and my career so far. Growing up, I never dreamt that I'd be working in wildlife conservation, and when it came to applying for university, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and very nearly made the awful decision of going for architecture, and quite last minute switched and applied for biology. I then had to email a load of universities to see whether they would actually accept me, because I only did one science at A level. I say this because if you don't know what you want to do for a job or what you want to study at university, that's okay. I've changed my job many times and I still don't really know where I'm going with my career. Although I was leaning towards zoology, my school teacher at the time advised me to go for straight biology because of the flexibility it provides when choosing modules. So in first year you do a lot of general stuff, but by second and third year I was picking mostly zoology modules. I studied biology at Leeds Uni, had a lot of fun, but when I left uni I still didn't really know what I wanted to do with that degree or what I wanted to do as a career. When I left uni, I jumped around a load of different jobs. I was working at a primary school, in a cafe, in a Toby carvery. I went to work in America for a few months. I knew I sort of wanted to work with animals, but I didn't really know what options were out there. So I started doing a little bit of volunteer work with my local wildlife trust at the West Midlands Safari Park, but didn't really have a clear direction of what I wanted to do. The first exciting job I had was working as an education ranger at Twycross Zoo, where I do lots of public engagement talks around the different animal enclosures, like the elephants, the penguins, the chimpanzees, and spent a lot of time either freezing cold stood in the lemur walkthrough or boiling hot in the butterfly house. I then got a job as a seasonal education officer where I'd lead workshops and school groups, and as part of this job I would lead school groups and youth clubs around a nature reserve that was attached to the zoo. And it was this experience that got me thinking that maybe I want to be teaching people about local wildlife and how they can protect and look after wildlife at home. So I left my job at the zoo and started to think about applying for jobs in conservation. Whilst looking for jobs, I was working in a school and a cafe, and I was applying for entry-level conservation jobs all over the country without much luck. I must have applied for about 50 jobs and maybe got about 3 or 4 interviews. During one of these interviews though, for a job at a national park, which was basically just telling people to keep their dogs on leads and pick up poo, I thought I could manage that. Didn't get it, but in the feedback of that interview he said try and do some more volunteering, in particular with the RSPB. So although I was really deflated about not getting this job, I went home, started looking at volunteering opportunities with the RSPB, and then signed up to do an internship at an RSPB reserve not too far from my home in Birmingham. I ended up doing that internship for 7 months. I learned a load of stuff, met a bunch of fantastic people, and it inspired my love of bird watching. So if it wasn't for that internship, maybe I wouldn't be into birds, maybe I wouldn't be making videos like I am today. So I'm really grateful I did that experience. After the internship finished, I was pretty eager to move out my parents' house, so I started applying for jobs again all over the country and accepted a job in Bristol at a science centre, presenting science shows in the planetarium and doing like science demonstrations and talking to children and families about science. That job also inspired my love of space and stars and stargazing, and that's all knowledge that I've still been able to incorporate into like my nocturnal wildlife walks. So if the owls and the badgers don't show up, I can still point out constellations in the stars. So while working at the Science Centre, I carried on my volunteering with Avon Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, Natural History Consortium, the Avon Gorge and Downs Wildlife Project, the National Trust, just to name a few. And I carried on applying for jobs. I had the Avon Wildlife Trust jobs page bookmark on my laptop that I would refresh daily. And thanks to that, I started finally getting interviews with the Wildlife Trust. And after my 3rd attempt, I finally wore them down and got my first paid role in wildlife conservation as a youth officer, leading school groups and work experience and youth clubs, teaching them about wildlife and how they can protect it. That started off as a part-time role and then moved to full-time. When the youth project finished, I then got a job as people and wildlife officer, where I would still be teaching people about wildlife, but not just children, people of all ages, families, adults. I would lead guided walks, workshops, nature well-being sessions. And then finally, the job I just left was communications officer, where I'd still be communicating and teaching people about wildlife, but more online and through digital comms like newsletters, blogs, the website, social media, and our members magazines as well. So that was my journey that I've been on so far into my career and how I got to be where I am today. Hopefully you found some of that useful, but I'm now going to move on into some more general tips and advice about wildlife careers that I've learned along the way. And I might take a little seat for this bit. So if you're considering trying to get a job in wildlife conservation, here are some like general things to consider and think about. Number one is that these roles are going to be competitive. Lots of people want to work outside in nature. So when you first start applying for jobs, try not to be put off if you're not hearing back. Maybe be willing to move across the country to get that first entry-level job. And yeah, keep at it. Keep applying for jobs because you will get there in the end. Another thing to consider is the pay. I don't want to say that the money in conservation is like terrible, but if you want to be a millionaire and get rich quick, then working in nature and wildlife conservation isn't going to be the way to do that. You're likely going to be working for charities. Some of these might be quite small, so you're not going to be making as much money as if you're working in the private sector, so bear that in mind. Another thing to think about is that you might not actually see that much wildlife. I mean, yes, you're going to see more than if you're working in a bank or a supermarket, but quite a lot of conservation charities involve looking after the land, the habitat, rather than the animals themselves. When I used to tell people that I work in wildlife conservation, a lot of them would think that I would be looking after baby badgers or nursing little rabbits back to health. But unless you're working for like an animal shelter or a rehabilitation centre, you're probably not going to get that hands-on experience with animals. And if you're working in conservation, you're likely to be looking after habitats rather than the animals themselves. You're going to see some wildlife, but it's not going to be right there in your hands. It's going to be at a distance, enjoying it in its natural habitat. Another thing to consider that is quite normal across the sector is that a lot of these contracts are seasonal or just for a fixed period of time for a certain contract. So you might get a job and it might only last for a year or 18 months until that project funding runs out. Also, it's not the most glamorous industry to work in. You might be outside working in all weather conditions, in the cold, the wet, the rain, getting muddy, getting stung by nettles, all that sort of stuff. With all that being said, I think working in nature and wildlife conservation does give you that feel-good factor of working for something that you believe is worthwhile, that you're passionate about, that you believe in, working for an organisation whose values align with your own. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot more to your career choices than just how much money you make, and working in an industry for an organisation that you believe in, I think, is really important. So at the start of your nature and wildlife conservation journey, it's worthwhile doing a little bit of research. Have a think about what your dream job would be. The sector is extremely varied. There's loads of different roles out there for you to do. So have a little explore. What would you really enjoy doing? You can even reach out to some organisations through email or LinkedIn, ask people about their jobs, ask them how they got into the role they're in now. That sort of like personal information is going to be really useful in helping you decide what sort of route you want to go down. And learning what sort of area you want to be in is really going to help you narrow your focus. It's going to help you decide what sort of volunteering you want to do, what sort of skills you want to develop. For example, if you know you want to be out on nature reserves doing practical stuff, then getting things like your chainsaw skills or your brush cutter license are going to be really useful. But if you can see yourself more working with children and in teaching people about wildlife, then maybe getting that sort of public speaking skills is going to be really useful instead. So see if you can narrow down what sort of area you want to work in. You might even be able to find the job description or the person specification of those roles, and you'll be able to see what sort of skills, knowledge and experience that they're looking for, and you can start to think about how you might go about getting that sort of knowledge and skills so you can apply for those jobs in the future. All right, so now you've done some research and you've got a rough idea about what sort of area in wildlife conservation you want to go after. The next step, and the advice that you'll hear over and over again, is to go and do some volunteering. So at the start, I mentioned briefly about the volunteering that I did, especially my internship with the RSPB, and how valuable I found it in my career. Because volunteering is useful for all sorts of things. You'll develop your knowledge, you'll learn new skills, you'll get experience that you can talk about in job applications or in interviews. But it's not just that as well. You'll also meet loads of people. You'll meet people who are trying to get into the sector like you are and develop their own skills, and you'll be able to talk to them and share stories and share advice of what they've learned as well. But you'll also meet people in these organizations who are doing similar jobs that you're after. And you'll be able to ask their advice, talk to them, get to know them. You might then even meet those people later on in your career. You might work with them. They might be in interviews. So you never know who you're going to meet and how it might benefit your career. So volunteering is useful in so many different ways. Obviously, volunteering is going to take up some of your time, and unfortunately, you won't get paid, but it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. You don't have to go abroad to volunteering. You can get lots of experience right here in the UK on your doorstep. Check in with your local council, even your local park might have a Friends of group, your local wildlife trust. There's loads of opportunities that you can get involved with. And don't be intimidated thinking you have to volunteer loads and loads of your time. Just offer up what you can and what you can manage. Maybe an evening here, the odd day there, a little bit on the weekend, and also try and volunteer with lots of different organizations, because it's just going to mean that you've got even more experiences and stories to tell in applications and in job interviews. There's also loads of remote opportunities you can get involved with now. You might be able to help write blogs or create content for social media for various organizations. So you might even be able to do some volunteering from home. With all that being said, volunteering can be tricky. If you're a carer, if you've got kids or you have to work, fitting volunteering in around that can be really tricky. And it is a bit of a problem with the environmental sector, with the amount of volunteering they expect people to do to get into these roles. But try and do some if you can. It's going to be really, really valuable. So reach out to loads of organizations and see what sort of volunteering opportunities that you can manage with your lifestyle, and just see if you can start doing it. This footpath has sort of led me into a strange back entrance of a garden centre. So I think I'm going to turn around and go back the other way. Okay, education. So lots of people ask, do you need a degree? Do you need to have gone to university to work in wildlife conservation? So I have a degree in biology, and I found that has been really helpful. It did teach me a load of skills and knowledge that was useful in my roles. However, there is a push now to diversify the environmental sector, and a lot of jobs now aren't asking for a specific degree, so it's not essential. So don't feel like you have to go to university. You can get just as much skills and knowledge and experience through volunteering. So you can't go to university, see if you can get stuck into volunteering instead. But if you are thinking about university, think about where you're going. Think about what sort of organizations are nearby, what sort of nature might be on your doorstep, what sort of projects might be able to get involved with, depending on what city you go and study in. So have a good think about it. Think about what course you want to do. There's loads of great courses now in wildlife conservation, in science communication, biology, zoology, genetics, evolutionary biology, all sorts of stuff you can study. So have a good think about it. Think about where you want to study. But yeah, don't think that you have to go to a university. There are loads of different ways that you can get those skills instead. For example, instead of going to university, you could look into doing an internship. I spoke at the start about my internship with the RSPB. Absolutely loved it. But loads of organizations do internships and placements as well. The Wildlife Trust do some. I know the National Trust do some as well. So have a little think about those. If you've got the time and you've got the resource to commit to a long period of volunteering with an internship or placement, some of these might actually be paid. In fact, I think some of these are actually paid nowadays, which is absolutely fantastic. So maybe instead of going to university, you could think about doing volunteering or doing an internship or a placement instead. Steam train. All right, I'm going to take a little seat on this tree just here. All right, so applying for jobs can be really difficult and time consuming. Very few places nowadays just want a generic CV sent in. So here's everything that I've learned about applying for jobs. Firstly, find out how you need to apply. Is it an application form? Is it a letter? Is it a CV? Is it a video application? Find out exactly how you need to do it, because if they're after an application form and you just send in a CV, you're not even going to be considered. And then make a note of the deadline and write that down in your diary or your calendar, and don't forget. Don't be put off if when you're looking at the job description or the person specification, you don't have everything that they're asked for. Remember, that's like their wish list, their ideal candidate. Very few people, if any, are going to have every single thing on that list. So if you still think you're going to be good at the job and you still enjoy it, definitely still apply. When writing the application, take a look at the person specification. They'll have this big list of everything they're looking for, or the skills, knowledge and experience that they're after. You're going to go through each and every single one of those points and write down that you can do it, and give an example of when you've done it in your career so far. So if they say we're after a good team player, it's not enough just to say I am a good team player. Say I'm a good team player and these are the examples where I've demonstrated it. If you don't have some of that experience, say what you've got that's relevant, or say how you might get that experience in the future, or how you might develop that skill. So still talk about it even if you don't have it. I was actually told to put little subheadings in the application. For example, again, if it's team player, I'd put good team player in bold as a subheading. Remember, people are going to be looking at these job applications quite quickly. They're going to be skimming them. They might be looking at a lot of them in one day. So you want to make it as easy for them as possible to pick up your application, see the skills that you've got, and decide quickly whether you're going to get an interview. So make it as easy for them as possible, put subheadings, make it nice and clear, and go through every single point and demonstrate that you've got it. And finally, when it comes to job applications, like I said at the start, these jobs are going to be competitive, and try not to be put off by rejection. Try not to be upset if you don't get it. Always ask for feedback and try and take it on board. It's not a no, it's a not yet, and all that motivational stuff. It's not a failure, it's a learning moment. My mum used to say, it wasn't meant to be, and they're lost. They don't know what they're missing. So try not to get put off, keep applying for jobs, and eventually something is going to come your way. Okay, I'm just going to start walking again before I start talking about interviews. And I'm aware that there's going to be loads of better videos on the internet all about interview prep. So I'm going to try and keep this bit short. So firstly, if you've got an interview, congratulations, that's a big achievement. Try and celebrate the success of that. A big thing with interviews is try and be as confident and smiley as possible. That goes a really long way. And if you're not feeling it, fake it. You're performing as a character, as their ideal candidate. So try and be as smiley and as confident and polite as possible. If you can, learn the names of the interview panel. Find out who's going to be interviewing you. So when you can go to the interview, you know all their names, you can say hello to them all individually. And at the end, you can say thank you and goodbye to them all individually as well. And saying their name back to them is a great way to build that personal connection and help them remember you as a polite and friendly candidate. It's always good to prepare an answer for those basic questions that you know they're going to ask. Tell us a bit about yourself. Why do you want to work for this organisation? What about this role gets you excited? Things like that. Prepare an answer and practice it so you're ready in the interview. Also, prepare some examples of times that you've demonstrated some of the things they're after in the person specification. For example, a time you've managed conflict, a time you've performed well in a team, etc. Look at the person specification and prepare some examples for those points in there. In the interview, take your time with the answers. Have a little time to think beforehand. You can always ask them to repeat the question if you need a little bit more time to think, or say that's a really great question, or even just say that's a brilliant question, let me have a think for a minute, and then give your answer. At the end of the interview, they're going to ask, do you have any questions for us? Always try and have at least 1 or 2 questions prepared to ask them at the end of the interview. It's a great way to show that you're interested in the role enough that you've thought about it and got some questions to ask them. Try to avoid asking about like lunch breaks and holiday and pay, etc. at that point in the interview, but have a couple of questions ready. And if they've answered your question in the interview itself, you can say that. You can say, oh, I was going to ask you about this, but you've answered that earlier, so thank you very much for that. Some of the questions that I've asked at the end of interviews are, what's the best thing about working for this organisation? How long have you been working here? Do you enjoy working for this organisation? It just shows that you're interested in like the culture of that organisation and that you're interested in the role. So always have a question ready to ask them at the end. Before going into the interview, do a little bit of research, go on the company's website, learn their mission statement, their values, etc. Have a little look to see what projects and campaigns they've got going on at the moment and see if you can pepper that knowledge in throughout the interview. Other than that, just go in there and do your best. Be friendly, be smiley, be confident. Think of it as an opportunity to practice your interview technique and just go and give it your best shot. Because remember, you can't do better than your best. So I'm just going to head back to the campsite now to finish off the video by answering some of your questions. So I asked everybody on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube if they had any questions about wildlife, careers, or getting a job working with nature, to send them in. So I'll get back to the campsite and I'll answer some of those questions. All right, let's finish off with some of your questions. So, user 7340593405973 on TikTok said, what's the best non-wildlife related skill to have? It's a good question, and I'd have to say it's probably having a driving license. So a lot of organisations, a lot of roles will ask for this because a lot of them will involve travel. You might need to drive between sites, carry tools around, drive to different schools if you're doing engagement stuff or school assemblies. So having a driving license on your CV will be really, really useful. Cindy on YouTube said, can you give advice on how to find volunteering positions? Good question, Cindy. So my favorite website was environmentjob.co.uk, which lists loads of different jobs and also volunteering opportunities as well. So bookmark that page, check it regularly for upcoming job roles and also volunteering positions. But also, if you're aware of local conservation charities and organizations in your area, go on their website, bookmark their jobs page and keep refreshing those to see if anything comes up. Also reach out to your local councils, your local parks as well. These places might have friends of groups that you can get involved with to do some volunteer work. So look locally to you, look on websites, bookmark the pages of local organisations and keep refreshing them. Ems on Instagram asked, can you go from a non-biology degree into conservation? I'm doing a media BA. Yes, absolutely. So especially things like media and communications and digital stuff, that's really, really useful in getting into wildlife conservation, because all these charities, they need to communicate what they're doing, they need to fundraise, they might need to get members signed up, they might need donations. That's all communications, that's all media as well. I think David Attenborough himself has even said that now saving the planet is actually a communications issue, because we know what we need to do, we just need to communicate it and change people's hearts and minds and get them involved with this stuff. So all that sort of communication and media skills will be really, really useful in wildlife conservation. So that's definitely a good switch. I had 2 questions on Instagram that said, where do I go after uni and what do you do after graduation? So my first bit of advice is, if you've gone straight from school straight to uni, make sure you give yourselves a bit of time just to chill out, enjoy yourself for a little bit. That's a lot of work. You've been studying for a very long time, so make sure you give yourself some time to chill. But also I think after uni or after school or after graduation, you've probably got a little bit more free time, a little bit more flexibility than you might have later on in life. So I would consider looking at doing maybe one of these long-term internships or placements or traineeships where you can dedicate a longer period of time to learning skills and getting experience. Like I said, my RSPB internship was really, really great. So look at the RSPB ones, look at the Wildlife Trust, look at the National Trust, look with your council, see if you can spend a little bit more time doing volunteering and developing those skills and experience before you start applying for jobs. What other questions do we have? Someone wrote in to say they want to get involved in wildlife conservation, but they feel they are too old for a complete career change. I mean, firstly, I understand that changing careers can be daunting at the best of times, and if you have things like bills and rent and children to look after, it's going to be quite daunting to think about just leaving a career you're settled in and starting something completely new. But I think if you know that you want to get into wildlife conservation, you know you really care about this and you're passionate about it, I think you owe it to yourself to go after what you want to do. I mean, our working lives are going to be so long these days. I remember my year 7 school teacher said that I'd probably be working until I'm 75. So to make sure you're doing something that you really enjoy. So I think if you know that it's something you want to do, you owe it to yourself to give it a go. And don't feel like you just have to completely quit and then start again. Carry on doing your current career and your current job, and just start thinking about where you might be able to start developing your conservation skills and knowledge in your free time or your spare time. So you maybe do a little bit of volunteering on the side, start building up those skills and those connections, etc. And then just like slowly see if you can transition into wildlife conservation. I'm sure from your current job and your current career, you've got loads of transferable skills. So maybe start reaching out to organisations that you're interested in or that you like the look of. Tell them about yourself, show them what skills and things that you've got, and start thinking about how you can transfer those skills over into wildlife conservation. I had one question that said, what are the best events for networking? In Bristol, there were regular like environmental meetups and mingles where you could go and network with different organisations. So have a little explore on things like Facebook events or Eventbrite and see if there are networking events near you where you can go along and meet some people. I don't really like networking. I'm not like a brilliant networker or small talker, but going to some of these events is really useful. You never know who you're going to meet, who you're going to chat to, and how that might benefit your career. So it's a good question, and see if you can find some of those networking events in your local area. I will look at Facebook and Eventbrite. Ems on Instagram said, how to bump up my CV for potential jobs in conservation. Very good question. I spoke about some of these things already. Volunteering is a really, really big one. But another thing I want to add is any way that you can demonstrate that you're really passionate and you care about nature and wildlife. For me, that was sharing my wildlife photography on Instagram, doing things like that, creating a social media account. That acted as like a virtual CV for me, that I could demonstrate I had skills in content creation and photography, and it demonstrated that I really cared about this stuff enough to make content and post about it online. But it doesn't just have to be that. You could make a blog, you could make a YouTube channel, you could do some fundraising, you could do some like nature and wildlife inspired art. I don't know, anything that demonstrates that you're really passionate about this, that could make you stand out from other people in applications or interviews. See if you can demonstrate your passion and love for nature and wildlife in lots of different ways. And I do think posting and sharing stuff on social media is a good option. It shows you can do loads of different stuff. It shows that you're creative, you can write captions, you can edit videos. It's a great way of developing your speaking skills and your communication. But if you're a bit daunted by that, you don't even have to have your face in the videos. You can do voiceovers, you don't have to talk, you can just do pictures, create stuff on Canva, whatever it is. I wish I'd started social media earlier. This is just a great way to demonstrate my passion and the skills that I have and show that out online. And it has led to a load of different career opportunities for me. So I wish I'd started earlier. So see if you can demonstrate your love for wildlife in as many different ways as possible. Try and make it unique, just to make you stand out from the crowd in those applications and in those interviews. Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you ever so much to everyone who asked a question. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's watched this video. If you found it useful or helpful in any way, please give it a like. Let me know in the comments. Consider subscribing. And if you have a question about working in nature or working with wildlife, put them in the comments too, and I'll get back to every single one of you, I promise. And finally, I just want to wish you all the very best of luck in your journey into working in nature and wildlife. I wish you all the best. Keep at it. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you later. Bye.